Welcome back to another lesson, guys, and in this session we're going to be talking about my first true love, which is exercise. Now this is one video of a few in this sequence as we start to build upon the principles of how to manage your type 1 diabetes around physical activity and exercise. Now throughout these videos we're going to be making specific reference to some carbohydrate values and also insulin adjustment principles. So if you want to just recheck or take note of any of the things that we talk about, you can either write some notes down as we talk about them or replay the videos. But if you just want a reference guide, then go to the members area and download the plan that comes with this, because it's all in there. So it's there for your reference to check back on, and you could take a picture of it on your phone perhaps, so you have it to hand so you know what to do if you're not next to your laptop. This first video is looking at the basics of exercise and how it impacts your type 1 diabetes. We're then going to start to move on in subsequent videos about the specific management strategies of exercise. So now we've got the introductions out of the way, let's jump right in and start session 1. Okay, so as you can see, we've got several points up on the board here. So we're just going to work through these as we go. Now the first point here might appear actually a little bit nitpicky, because we're trying to define the difference between physical activity and exercise. So you almost think, what's the point? Well, there's a very specific reason we do this. And that reason is physical activity tends to be exercise that's built into your day just naturally. So walking to the shops or being particularly busy at work, which may or may not be planned. So if it's unplanned, then you cannot preempt any management strategies going into it because you don't know you're going to be doing it. So that's important. Whereas exercise tends to be much more structured. You know you're going to be doing it. You might go to the gym or go play sport. So you can prepare in advance about combating the effects of exercise. So just defining the two is always a good thing. But from this point forward, we'll just refer to everything as exercise, just because it's easier, and you probably don't want me saying physical activity or exercise all the time. And we have two types of exercise at a very simplistic level. Really, it gets a lot more complicated if you really wanted to get into exercise physiology, but from a diabetes perspective, we don't have to get too complex. And these two types of exercise you may have heard of before. One is called aerobic exercise, and one is called anaerobic exercise. Now we can make this even simpler, and if you're not familiar with those terms, you may be familiar with these. We can call aerobic exercise cardio, and we can call anaerobic exercise high intensity training. So what does it mean then to be in the cardio or aerobic zone? So this basically means an intensity that you're able to sustain for quite a long time. So it's usually steady state exercise. Examples include jogging, cycling, swimming, and even walking. And all aerobic means is with oxygen. So your body is able to breathe in enough oxygen to meet the demand of your body. So you'll be out of breath, but you'll still be able to hold a conversation or at least get words out to someone that you might be talking to, okay? Whereas anaerobic or high intensity, this is much more high intensity. We know when we've hit this zone. In fact, you've probably been there before yourselves. You'll tip into a very distinct point where your breathing rate becomes very noticeable. You might not be able to hold a conversation anymore, maybe one-word responses, or you won't be able to reply at all. Examples include like lifting weights, certain sports, sprinting, circuit training, so that very high intensity stuff. So anaerobic exercise actually means without oxygen. And the reason it means without oxygen is because suddenly you're not able to breathe in enough oxygen to meet the demand placed on your body for that activity. So you're basically saturated, which means high intensity training is finite. You will have to reduce the intensity after a certain period of time. So that's why it's the 100-meter sprint and not the 100-mile sprint, because your body physically has to reduce the intensity to allow the oxygen to get in. So that's the difference. With oxygen, without oxygen, lower intensity exercise that you can sustain, higher intensity exercise that you're going to have to reduce the intensity of very shortly. Now, the reason that we're defining this is because these two different types of exercise have a different impact on your body with regards to your blood glucose levels. So aerobic exercise actually just reduces your blood glucose levels for reasons we'll talk about in a second, okay? So the net effect of cardio and aerobic exercise is your glucose levels will steadily decline. Whereas anaerobic exercise, you will see an initial increase in your glucose levels, followed by a drop later. So why is that? So there's a couple of reasons, okay? So let's start with the aerobic activity first. So when you're exercising, if we just turn over this, your body has a very clever system of getting energy and glucose into the cells where it can be converted to energy, okay? So usually, let's say you have your blood vessels, okay, like this, and you've got glucose in your blood vessels. So it's being transported around. That's how our body transports energy. And then here we have your cell, and this is where the energy is required, okay? So basically the body's goal is to get the energy or the glucose from here to here, where it can be converted into energy and used for the body to power that exercise. Now, usually the way the body gets this glucose out of the blood and into the cell is with the use of insulin. So we got little receptors on the top of the cell here that insulin binds to, which then opens up the door. I'm trying to draw a door, it's not going very well. Which opens up the door, and then it allows the glucose to move into the cell, okay? Now, obviously, this is the same mechanism as why type 1 diabetes is a problem, because without the insulin keys, you can't get the glucose into the cell, which can't convert it to energy, so it stays in the blood, and that's very harmful to the body if it stays in the blood and in high amounts. But during exercise, your body has a very clever way of getting glucose into the body independent of insulin, and that's because the demand is higher. So actually, without diabetes, what happens is your body produces less insulin. It actually tends to dub down the amount of insulin required, because insulin also tells your body to stop releasing glucose from the liver. And obviously, when you have an energy demand that's increased, the last thing you want to do is tell your body, do not release extra glucose. You want to release glucose. So we turn off the insulin normally, and then we use something else to get the glucose into the cells, and these are called GLUT4 receptors. Now, GLUT4 receptors basically act like little shuttle buses in the cell that drive out to the cell, and they open the door for the glucose to enter the cell, which can then be used for energy. So they work very much like insulin, but almost from the inside. So they're kind of like your bus replacement service when insulin's out of commission. So that's what's going on in the body, okay? Now, as I say, usually insulin production is reduced without diabetes. However, if you're using subcutaneous injections to manage your diabetes, once you inject your insulin, it is in your system. You cannot change the dose unless you are using an insulin pump where you have more flexibility. If you remember back to our video about the differences between subcutaneous injections and pump. Pump users have much more flexibility. If you're not on a pump, then you cannot have that luxury of reducing your insulin supply. So what do we end up with? We end up with a double whammy. We have the insulin letting glucose in, and we also have the shuttle buses, the GLUT4 receptors, driving out and pulling in the glucose. So what does that leave you susceptible to? Low blood sugars, which is kind of the name of the game with exercise management surrounding cardio exercise. So you're at a big risk of hypos with cardio exercise. Anaerobic or high intensity exercise still has that effect happening. So the long-term effect of HIIT training, as we'll call it, high intensity exercise, so HIIT, or high intensity training, so HIIT, still has those GLUT4 receptors working. So longer term effect, still on for a drop in your blood glucose levels. However, because this is stressful to the body, it's hard work, initially you can get a rise in your blood glucose levels because as your body becomes stressed, it releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress hormones. And stress hormones are designed to get things moving, get things going. If you ever get stressed, you might feel your heart beating quicker. That's because your body's ramping it up. That's the adrenaline going. And when that happens, your liver also releases glucose because it's basically getting you prepared for a stressful event. From a physiological perspective or an evolutionary perspective, it's the same response if you saw a lion in the woods or the savannah and you had to run away. So your body's getting you ready to run away. Only in the modern day, we don't have that. We just have stress at work or go into the gym or high intensity exercise. So you get this initial increase in your glucose level followed by the drop later. So that can make it quite difficult to manage, and this is exactly the sort of things we're going to be talking about how to manage that as we go forward. Now, the other thing that we need to consider is the lasting effect of this exercise, because you don't just stop exercising and then the effect turns off immediately. The only time that happens is if you're having very low intensity exercise, like you might go for a very short walk. When you finish that walk, your body gets back to baseline quite quickly. Whereas if you go for a 10-mile run, even if you're in the cardio zone, that's going to have lasting implications as your body settles back down, because it's going to have a longer effect than if you just went for a 20-minute walk. Now, we call this effect the EPOC effect. This is the excessive post-exercise oxygen consumption. Now, that's a mouthful, so we'll just call it EPOC. So essentially what EPOC is, that lasting effect of exercise, and that's going to have knock-on effects with regards to what you do later in the day after your exercise session with regards to your insulin and your food. And when we tie this all together, really it comes down to two management strategies. Insulin reduction or increases in certain situations when we're talking about HIIT training, more on that later, and also how we're fueling that exercise, so taking on additional carbohydrates to prevent hypos from this GLUT4 plus insulin response. Now, as I say, some people, pump users in particular, have more flexibility because they can dial down this insulin much more flexibly than someone who's not on pump therapy. But you're still relying on yourself to be as good as your own body to do this. And any mistakes can still cause hypos or problems with your glucose levels. So over the course of the next few videos, we're going to be exploring how to do this. We're going to break it down into condensed videos so we're not taking on too much each session. And hopefully you're going to follow along and it'll be really clear for you. But like I say, if you're getting lost in it all, check out your online plan and actually look at it in the readable format, because it might just make it a bit more clear. And also any specific values or specific advice we give that you might not remember from in the video, it's all there for you. So I think we'll leave it there for this video, and I will see you in the next lesson.